Ladies and gents, welcome to the reaction. It's been a while, but yeah, historical video from OSP. The dark ages were fine actually. History Hijinks by the channel OSP. History Hijinks, this series I guess is really fun. There have been many History Hijinks videos. I think I've already reacted to 2 or 3, which is always fun because it's History Hijinks. I remember there was a specific point where certain people tried to bomb something in London or something, but the whole story was stupid. But yeah, this is gonna be about dark ages. I mean, first of all, dark ages are dark ages because there's not much of information from that time, right? But yeah, people have this kind of I don't know, just because we as humans don't try to think about history that far back, and anything beyond dark ages in the past, people don't think about it much. So people have this kind of a view of dark ages as being one of the early times, and they just assume like, oh, this must be one of the most fucked up time there is, right? And knowing that today's world and the norms, yeah, it would feel a lot of things from dark ages were fucked up, let's be honest, but not as much as people think, right? People think it was just chaotic. It was just chaos all around, right? Fucked up things were happening all around. There was no safety. No, that's that's not the case. It's just around that time, I guess there weren't many cultural booms happening, so there wasn't much of literature around. There wasn't much of written history, so it's dark ages that way. But yeah, it's gonna be fun watching this. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. There is a playlist I've created for OSP reactions. That's also in the description. So yeah, let's read.
Popular conceptions of world history can be rightly accused of following something of a formula, and among slavish gossip circles about the sex lives of famous monarchs is an insistence that the medieval period is either dumb and boring, or solely interesting by virtue of how abysmal it was. Thus follows the utter grimefest of the fantasy genre. But I can't quite blame popular media for working off a shared set of assumptions that in turn endlessly perpetuate themselves, nor is it fair to call this a recent trend, as Petrarch called post-Roman history the Dark Ages in the 1330s, and Giorgio Vasari first coined the term Rinascita in 1550. So by their hot takes combined,
Romans, let's be honest, Romans didn't know much about the Greek times, right? So they were surprised by a lot of things. They even adapted certain Greek things, and most of them didn't even know that they did.
this concept of Rome good, 15th century Italy good, everything else trash seemed to stick, leaving the insultingly titled Dark Ages as the elevator music between the long-dead glories of the classical world and the hot new Renaissance. And at that point, why hold back? Just call it the Dark Ages to show us how you really feel. And far be it from me to lecture anyone for liking the classics, but the character assassination of medieval history goes too far when its most defining traits are darkness, murder, sex, and religious corruption. Sometimes in that order. And I'd be willing to bet that, at least in the English-speaking world, this common image results from our suspiciously narrow focus on a very small slice of geography. Namely, whatever is in a 500-mile radius of London. That nets us the Isles, France, Germany, and the gentle implication of Scandinavia. This shouldn't be too surprising, we tend to know our own histories best, but it's a little odd that this tunnel vision only applies from 500 to 1500 AD. And that has some pretty goofy consequences, like people rightly praising the unique setting and folklore inspirations behind The Witcher when that's just fantasy Poland. My guys, Poland is great, but if Poland counts for exotic, then we need to reevaluate some stuff. Okay, but what
it kind of makes sense if your vision is from the England and around the England, France, basically, right around that area. I guess Poland can feel this as exotic, I guess, especially the Poland's folklore and the I guess the things around it. I mean, yeah, and especially, to Western audience, right? Witcher mythology based on more of a Polish thing, it kind of makes sense. Like, lots of different mythologies come from lots of Western things, but not much of like something like Poland and things like that. So it does feel exotic in that way.
What am I on about here? Essentially, what we ignore and what we choose to glamorize in the medieval period are a disservice to history and to ourselves. Now, there's a lot of ground to cover and a lot I'm sadly going to skip, but in attempting to take a far-reaching and diverse survey of the Middle Ages in order to show how they really weren't that dark at all, let's do some history. First off, the most glaring counterpoint to the myth of medieval squalor is China. For 8 centuries out of the millennium, it operated a unified imperial dynasty, which was a new record for stability and peace. And while the state was prosperous and the cities were dazzlingly ornate,
oh yeah, around this time, I mean, China, Islamic world, right? Back then and things like that were kind of at the peak of it, right? So I get it, Dark Ages usually applies to, like he said, area around the London basically, right? Those European places. But I always thought that Dark Ages implied that there is not much of information from that time or something. I didn't know dark, they mean literally dark, as in this is like grim places, grim times, where only bad things happen. I didn't know it was implied to that. I always thought Dark Ages means that, much of information is not there. I don't know.
The real accomplishment was in their cultural advances. During the Tang Dynasty, China's three main religions of Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism began to enmesh within each other, resulting not just in developments like the Taoism-inspired Zen Buddhism, but combining into a complex mythological canvas upon which stories like Journey to the West would later be told. This innovation was followed by a tune-up for the governing bureaucracy during the Song Dynasty, as well as a bunch of cool inventions like movable type printing and paper money. And speaking of money, trade relations with the outside world picked up substantially after the turn of the millennium, especially in the Yuan period. This was actually a Mongolian dynasty who conquered China in the 1200s, and in the following century was famously recounted by Marco Polo as prosperous beyond imagination. The rapid expansion of the Mongol Empire revived the ancient Silk Road, spreading trade and culture across Central Asia and over to the Muslim world. Now, unlike China's continuity and evolution, the Abrahamic religion of Islam was remarkably new, and a distinct civilization had formed around it impressively quickly. In just a few centuries after holy revelations in early 600s Arabia set things in motion, the Muslim faith filled the map from the Mediterranean all the way to the Indus Valley, unifying diverse people and disparate states in one pervading culture. And from the mid-700s onward, that culture was in its golden age, where faith found an eager ally in scholarship. Muslims living among the vibrantly multi-ethnic cities of Al-Andalus or along the ancient valleys of the Nile were brushing shoulders with some of the sharpest minds of the day, but nothing compared to the magnificent Abbasid capital of Baghdad, where the legendary House of Wisdom catered to seemingly every art and field of study, from theology to science and math to music. Fortunately for the Golden Age and everyone who prospered from it, there's a real resilience in a culture.
Yeah. I'm a science guy, so I'm gonna focus on science more than art. I guess the science blew more from here, right? I don't know, I've said this in many scientific videos, but anything that starts with Al came from around this time, from this place, right? Alchemy, algebra, right? Like what third of the stars basically named after Arabic, right? Around this time. So year 1000 and around that time, it was a golden age for Islamic countries, Baghdad and things like that, right? So they were at the peak of it, right? Than anybody else. That trading was so strong. So I guess Dark Ages at that time implies to the European countries, sure, but definitely not for this, right? It was a golden age for these Islamic countries, not Dark Age.
Of many countries, as the Muslim world endured civil wars, caliphates supplanting each other, invaders in the Levant and Iberia, and even the Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258, but remained prosperous, cosmopolitan, and studious for centuries to come. From its vantage across the Mediterranean, Christendom had much to envy in the Islamic world, but a few enterprising states did their best to narrow that gap. So, I now cordially welcome you to the Venice portion of the video. If you didn't see this coming, then hi, welcome to the channel. Hope you like domes. See, the Republic of Venice was a small but powerful state that grew fabulously wealthy because of their rare eagerness to do business with Muslim colleagues. All they had to do was shake some hands, sell some goods, and then figure out what to build with their mountains of cash. And their government's enviable consistency ensured they stayed a fixture of Mediterranean trade for a millennium. But at home, Venice kept firmly to their familiar...
It is really sad, right? Like most people don't know the history of Venice like that. People just think of Venice as just some, town or something. But Venice was an empire, right? The trading, the things they made were kind of strong, especially around that time. So most people don't know that. First time I heard that from this channel, I guess a year or two ago, and I realized that holy shit, Venice used to be like that. But yeah, nobody would think of it like that.
Christian culture, unlike their southern neighbors in Sicily. From the 1000s, Norman newcomers built a gorgeous society from the mix of Lombard, Latin, Muslim, and Byzantine people in the south of Italy. The talents of this diverse cast are still seen in Sicilian architecture, which celebrates the kinship of Islam, Catholicism, and Byzantine Christianity. Fittingly, Sicily and Venice both could trace their roots to the still very much alive Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from the incomparable city of Constantinople since the 300s AD. This part of the empire, called Byzantine by later historians Sir survived all the turmoil that sank the West and continued the language, literature, and towering grandeur of the classical world, but here under the banner of Christianity. Although most Europeans sneered at Byzantine decadence, I maintain they were just jealous, nearby Slavic groups gladly threw in with the Eastern Church. Constantinople can claim credit for a few key conversions to Christianity, winning over the Bulgarians in 864, the Serbians in 870, and the vast Kievan Rus in 988, bringing much of Eastern Europe into its religious, cultural, and political orbit. To Catholicism's credit, they had converted the incoming Franks and Germanic tribes several centuries back, and soon after got the Isles, then Poland later on in 966, and finally the fearsome Scandinavian Vikings. But whereas Byzantine Christianity had an empire at its back, this was a lot for the Catholic Pope in Rome to organize from a city that had become very small after the Western Empire fell. So they got clever, creating an international administration of clergy and monasteries that let the church maintain religious authority across distant lands and kingdoms it didn't directly control. The other swerve was that...
I can just imagine right now, Pope and just gathering out like, God damn, this is just too much. What should we do now? Let's create a system where you can manage things from distance. Because let's be honest, right? Even kings have a hard time managing their own country because the place can be a bit too big. We are talking about a Christian kingdoms that can go across entire continents, right? I mean, Pope is supposed to handle that shit from there all the way to London and England, right? Which is a massive gap, right? You're managing all these different countries. I can just imagine the meeting. Let's just create some kind of a system, clergy and all that, just so we can manage this. Which is clever, let's be honest. It kind of worked.
If Rome no longer had an empire of its own, why not just order one? At the turn of the 9th century, such was the thinking of Pope Leo III, who recognized that the Frankish barbarians who arrived 4 centuries earlier had actually become quite competent rulers, with a dominion recently expanded from Gaul now to Germania and into Italy itself. And these Frankish kings of the Carolingian dynasty had long been allies of the Pope, so in 800 he crowned Charlemagne, the biggest of Charleses, as Emperor of the Romans. This sets up a fascinating dynamic where the religious authority in Rome presides over a vast network of monasteries across Europe, while also having an entire political state at its service. And this also benefits the emperor, because the notion of Christendom as a cultural tie that binds all Christian people and states is exceptionally fertile ground.
I can't stop laughing at this. Charlemagne, Emperor of Romans, right? And all this Holy Roman Empire, this Roman, that Roman. I'm just thinking right now, if Caesar was looking at that, just thinking, man, fuck you, you're not Roman.
For an empire. Leo and Charlemagne considered this a continuation of the Roman Empire, which, though cute, is fully untrue, so while historical habits force us to call this the Holy Roman Empire, consider this instead as Imperial Catholicism, a dominion spanning the state itself and the religious authority of the Pope. Unfortunately for the Carolingians, the kingdom split between 3 sons in 840, sending France and Germany on separate trajectories, but the idea of Christendom's empire was still so potent that Pope John crowned King Otto of Germany as Roman Emperor in 962, creating a state that would endure, evolve, and ultimately rule over Central Europe for nearly a millennium. This was not without friction, as popes and emperors spent centuries jockeying for authority over the other, often with bloody outcomes, and political cohesion did not come easily. Various bouts of royal weakness benefited the many small states of Germany.
Did you guess that? I love this channel. This is like Pope and they are fighting, and this is the notification came. Pope fight. That series, right? He talks about all the different popes and their fights. This is so good.
Spent centuries jockeying for authority over the other, often with bloody outcomes, and political cohesion did not come easily. Various bouts of royal weakness benefited the many small states of Germany and northern Italy, making the empire fertile ground for an array of functionally independent city-states. Elsewhere in the Christian north, centralized states were tricky to build, as Charlemagne's Carolingian dynasty lost hold of France in the face of internal strife and constant Viking raids, even resorting to giving one Viking lord a duchy in Normandy in the hope he'd stop making a mess. After ascending to the French throne in 987, it took 2 centuries for the Capetian dynasty to meaningfully control anything beyond Paris, so France didn't look like France until nearly 1600. As in Germany, local lords across the kingdom tended to do as they pleased, but another confounding factor for France was, of course, England. The Isles started their medieval era with migrations and missionaries from the mainland and had consolidated into 24 or so states by the 800s, just in time for the Vikings to arrive. This was bad news for the gorgeous and richly ornamented monasteries of Britain and Ireland, and 2 centuries of Anglo-Viking wars made kingdoms unstable, but it culminated in England.
See, this is badass because 1066, this is a time when William comes, like Big Dick William apparently. It just basically dominates things. The best thing was around that time there were 3 people who were trying to claim this, and one of them were also one of the Vikings, right? I mean, we just think of, I mean, there is even a fucking show right now. There's 2 shows, right? There is also a spin-off on Vikings. Everybody just gets off on word of Vikings so much, like they were the most untouchable ever, right? Nobody can touch Vikings, they were so badass. And yet, William basically kicked everybody's ass and took over England, right? One of the Vikings had the claim on it, it didn't work.
England's conquest by William of Normandy. This in turn kicked off a flurry of castle building, innovations towards parliamentary government, steady progress in conquering the rest of the Isles, 4 long centuries of slap fighting with France, and the endlessly dramatic War of the Roses. British history would become something of the model for how we see the medieval period, thanks in no small part to the historical plays of Shakespeare, who characterized states by the conflicts they faced and the great kings who fought them.
Shakespeare is so big that go to any country who doesn't know anything about any English history or any history basically besides the local history, or not even that, they will know the word Shakespeare. I mean, this is the shit as it become. I mean, people don't realize, like, all the big names of the history, go to a place that has nothing to do with anything Western, right? Go a place in Africa, go a place in Asia, India, whatever, right? And ask somebody, have you ever heard of the word Shakespeare? And they'll be like, yeah, I heard of that name. I don't know what that is. I don't know who that is or what they done, but I know the word Shakespeare. That's how famous the guy is. Of course he is.
In Northwest Europe, this wasn't strictly wrong, but it gives a very narrow perspective. Glory for kings and toil for the rest. And as we zoom back out, we see the Middle Ages were brutal. Wars were frequent, states were fragile, life was harsh. But so too is every square inch of planet Earth since the moment Bruce the single-celled life form first sprung into existence. That all can be true.
Oh, there was so many wars in the Dark Ages. Everybody was afraid. How you gonna chalk up 20th century? World War I, World War II, it was basically like no time at all between them two, right? Just like a decade or two. What the fuck we're doing in the year 2000? Right now it's 2022. Does it feel that long? That's how much time there is between World War I and World War II. If we are talking about a major global ass war, and that would be tiresome. That would be tiresome at a point, like even 2 decades after, people are like, holy shit. I mean, there was a really effed up war. We think of 9/11, what happened in 9/11, a tragedy in New York, right? As in, like, holy shit, that was such a big global news that people use that as like, oh, that was so big, and people are traumatized because of it. That created lots of, basically effect, especially by US government, lots of basically wars in Iraq and shit like that. It happened because of that event. And that was 21 years ago, right? I mean, 5 or 10 years ago, people were still like, holy shit, 9/11. Now it's kind of like, people seeing that as a distant memory. But that's 2 decades ago. And that's just one event. Imagine the Great War, World War I. After 2 decades later, holy shit, World War II. World War I doesn't even compare to World War II. That's how big it was, right? That's how massive and colossal it was. How many deaths. And this all happened in the first half of the 20th century, right? 20th century starts all the way to fucking 1945, 1950. This happened. And we're going to talk about how Dark Ages were bad. How bad was 20th century, man?
Right alongside the endless beauties of human civilization. We accept the Roman world as a disease-ridden murder fest and a staggering accomplishment of culture. And once we see the medieval worlds the same way, we unlock a tremendous wealth of history to explore. Because along with all that conflict came 4 waves of massive cultural advancement. First the Islamic Golden Age, then the Carolingian and Ottonian Renaissances following the start of their empires, and then the 12th century Renaissance, which brought on vernacular literature, Gothic architecture, early rediscoveries of classical culture, and the creation of European universities. The medieval world began at the dawn of Muslim, Orthodox, and Catholic cultures and transformed them into international civilizations, developing beautiful traditions of artistry and literature that still uphold European and Mediterranean societies today. All that to say, the Dark Ages is a myth perpetuated by Big Renaissance to sell you more paintings. Thank you so much for watching. Organizing multiple...
That's so much that last bit is perfect. Yeah. Look, here's the point I'm going to make. Lots of people have realized in the past that art, literature can be a powerful tool for propaganda in the future and, whatever. Because they knew back then, even the Greeks knew that if you write something up, this is going to survive for a long time, right? And so they made up a lot of shit just to give their point of view. So only reason dark ages are dark ages because Renaissance happened after it. And Renaissance was such a artistic boom, such a writing, and a lot of things come from it, right? That it is seen as like, all the things are written down from their point of view, right? In this way, right? Dark ages were not like that. So basically, just because you have a voice and you can write things down, you can paint anything as bad. That's the point here, right? So dark ages were bad in a way for Europe, right? Or at least western part of Europe. Because Renaissance, basically Normans and post-Normans were kind of like, all this happened later on, right? Before that, it just feels somewhat dark. Like the Renaissance is where shit start to get up. Before there was just like artistic boom wasn't there, things wasn't there. But that doesn't mean it was torture and the living condition was so bad. That's the case with all the time, all centuries, right? There's always been slaughter. There's always been certain empire and kings that is killing towns, taking over shit, right? But yeah, dark ages doesn't imply to the whole world, because during the dark ages, there were golden ages for things like Islam and other places. So yeah, this was a good video. But I always assumed that the dark just means the less information, not no information, less information, because I'm pretty sure there are many dark ages. Around the Greeks' time, there were dark ages. That implies that there is no data there, right? Before all the books came out that we know of. So I don't know. I always thought that's the case. Maybe that's not the case with this dark age. Maybe that's the case with the Greek time dark age. But in this dark age, it just means that, the time were bad. That was, yeah. Historians have much power. Artists have much power. They can paint things in any light. They can write up things in any light. And in the future, that's how it's going to be interpreted. So yeah. All right. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. I love history. I love this channel, right? If you want to do more from this channel, definitely comment down, because I have done a lot of it. I just took a gap of 6 or 8 months. Before that, I used to do this a lot, basically every day. That's why I have 80-90 reaction from this channel. And I love the history part of it, right? History, hijinks, lots of other historical videos. So if you want me to do more of that, definitely comment down. And yeah, I'll see you next time.